Job chapter 3. I'm not going to be able to make it through this.
I'll read it.
You read it.
Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Job chapter 3. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And Job said, "Let the day perish on which I was born, and the night that said, a man is conceived. Let that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor light shine upon it. Let gloom and deep darkness claim it. Let clouds dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. That night, let thick darkness seize it. Let it not rejoice among the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. Behold, let that night be barren. Let no joyful cry enter it. Let those curse it who curse the day, who are ready to rouse up Leviathan. Let the stars of its dawn be dark. Let it hope for light but have none, nor see the eyelids of the morning, because it did not shut the doors of my mother's womb, nor hide trouble from my eyes. Why did I not die at birth, come out of the womb and expire? Why did the knees receive me, or why the breasts that I should nurse? For then I would have lain down and been quiet. I would have slept, then I would have been at rest. With kings and counselors of the earth who rebuilt ruins for themselves, or with princes who had gold, who filled their houses with silver. Or why was I not as a hidden stillborn child, as infants who never see the light? There the wicked cease from troubling, and there the weary are at rest. There the prisoners are at ease together. They hear not the voice of the taskmaster. The small and the great are there, and the slave is free from his master. Why is light given to him who is in misery, and life to the bitter in soul, who long for death, but it comes not, and dig for it more than for hidden treasures, who rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they find the grave? Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? For my sighing comes instead of my bread, and my groanings are poured out like water. For the thing that I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, but trouble comes."
It's too intense, man.
Yeah.
All right. So, a few things happen here. First of all, like, this is in direct contrast to the birthday celebrations that we have in the prologue. Like the exact opposite. It's like the thing that he and his family held most dear and most holy. He's now reversing that on himself. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one thing. And there's also a reversal in his, like, a pious man doesn't say these things. They're, especially like verse 8, let those curse it who curse the day, who are ready to rouse up Leviathan. He's calling someone to curse it. Whoever's cursing the day, those are not good people. Something like the priests of darkness, or, whoever's cursing the day, he's asking them to curse it. The ones that are ready to rouse up Leviathan. So these ones that are ready to rouse up destruction. He's asking for their help to he's not just asking to be not born, he's asking to be uncreated.
He wants to go back in time and erase the day that he was conceived.
Yeah.
That's what this is. Like, let that day, right? like he says, let the day perish in which I was born, and the night that said a man is conceived. Let that day be darkness. And then let gloom and deep darkness claim it. And that night, let thick darkness seize it. Let that night be barren, right? That there's no fertility in that night, that there's no conception.
Mm-hmm.
And, the stars of its dawn be dark, because it did not shut the doors of my mother's womb. And this is Shakespeare's to be or not to be, right?
And
This is what this is. And what I don't know if I'll be able to articulate it properly, but what I think is interesting here is that he doesn't want, like, he's not doing what his wife did, saying, okay, I want to commit suicide. He's wishing that he never was, right? And those are two different things to me. So he realizes that once he comes into existence, all that he's enduring is a possibility, right? And perhaps at one point he thought he could bear that, right? Thought he was ready for it.
And he did up to a point.
And he did.
Up until this point.
Right, after sitting with it for 7 days and 7 nights, right? And letting it sink in. And instead of, at that point, again, instead of wishing that instead of jumping off a cliff, okay, after thinking about this, he actually goes, I shouldn't have actually been born. Like, I need to go, I wish that I could go back into time and just close up that whole day so that I was never conceived. And it's not because he wants to die. It's that he knows that existence will require this from a man. That's why.
Yeah, it's the whole existential thrownness. And we're thrown into this. Like, we didn't ask to be born.
Right.
We didn't have any choice of the body we were born in, the parents we had, the situation, the time. Job is talking about just existence. And at this point, he kind of, he breaks, but let me ask you this. Does Job sin in this?
No.
He says some dark stuff. Is it sin?
I don't think so. Personally.
I don't think so either.
I don't think so at all. This is like, let this cup pass from me. This is the same idea to me anyway. This is like the Garden of Gethsemane, right?
Oh, it's exactly it.
This is knowing what is what suffering, how great suffering can be. Right. And I think because Job is he suffers everything at once. What was I going to say about that? He would have known someone who lost a loved one. He would have known someone who lost all their livestock. He would have known someone whose business was affected by a band of robbers, stole things and killed their servants and stole their whatevers, but he wouldn't have known someone that happened to all on the same day. Right.
No.
And so it's kind of like it's a far cry from what Job is going through, but it's like that moment I had where I just thought, I don't think I'll be able to bear this, and And I mean, if someone is integer, they're honest,
Right.
you know, and this is what Job is here. He's honest. He literally knows that there's no other way out than not to be born, than not to be. Like, existence will require this of you. And in Job's case, it required all of it at once.
Yep.
Right. And the only way that you get out of it is not to be born, not to exist. That's the only way you get out of it.
Yeah.
This is Peterson's "The World is Malevolent." Okay. That's
Right.
what Peterson's talking about when he's looking. It's like George MacDonald's quote, God sees things as they are, right? Now, Job wasn't stupid. Obviously not. Because he knows that the only way to get out of it is not to exist. That's the sign to me. That's the sign of a wise man. Okay. Right. You don't circumvent pain and suffering in this world. It will get you at some point. It will. And the only way not to have it affect you is not to be.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's what this says to me here.
Yeah. And, you know, it's kind of a contrast of what we see from Job and his initial reaction to the disaster, which is the Lord takes, the Lord gives, the Lord takes, blessed be the name of the Lord.
Well, it isn't though, Jess. Like,
but yeah, I mean,
he knows this, right? He knows that the Lord gives. Mm-hmm. And so the opposite must also be the same. The Lord takes away, right? If it's God always underneath everything, right? It's just the gravity of it. It's that, you know, he's had 7 days for this thing to lay on top of him, right? Mm-hmm. And it's so unbearable that he has to wish that he had never been born, because there's no other solution to this weight, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's a way in which Job's initial reaction is sort of beyond us in how he reacts, because of how, just how much integrity he had in his initial reaction. And then this lament here, mm-hmm. I feel like if a disaster struck me, I wouldn't be able to go to these depths, you know, like I would be affected, but Job just, I feel like, he's spanning the breadth of the best of humanity. So
he is.
both in his initial response, and then with this deeply dark and sorrowful lament, and I think it's just one of the guys in my Job Bible study said this is a deeply human book.
Yes. Yeah. And
I think this chapter is like, I mean, if you've suffered anything, mm-hmm. you can imagine being in Job's place and saying these things, like, and I always keep in my mind that at the very end, spoiler alert, God says that Job spoke correctly. Mm-hmm. And we can talk when we get to that eventually. We'll talk about what that means, but there's a way in which God shows something new to Job at the end, but there's also a way in which Job is speaking honestly. Job is not lying. He's not manipulating.
He's not trying to bargain. He's not doing all that stuff that one does, the the 7 steps of grief or something like that.
Right.
He's not doing all that, right? He's just, like in the first part, he wishes that he wasn't born, because if he wasn't born, he would never know any of this. Okay. It would just, because he would have never existed.
Yep.
That's his best solution. The second best solution is that he would have died at birth. That's not the same as not being born, right?
Yep.
And what's kind of interesting is that he talks about it. He talks about death in. He says, "There the wicked cease from troubling, and the weary are at rest, and the prisoners are at ease together, and the small and the great are there, and the slave is free from his master." So there's a sense of relief in death, right? Even for the stillborn child.
Yep.
Right? Like, think about that. Because the stillborn child only lived until it was born and then it died. So that's a tragedy in itself, right? That's pain and suffering right there. And there, like in the first part of this, he's just saying, let thick darkness seize it, like just black it out, right? It never happened.
Yeah, and it's kind of like Genesis 1 creation language that, let there be light, and then the separation of the light and the darkness, and Job was wanting that to be reversed for him.
Yeah. And then in the second one, the death is of the stillborn child. I just find it interesting that there's a sense of relief there, rest for the weary.
And we get some of that in Proverbs and especially Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is like death is the equalizer with,
right.
And a lot of, there's a lot in the wisdom literature in the Bible that talks about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then in the last part, he doesn't understand why
he's still around.
Right, it's given to him who is in misery.
Yep.
Right. Like, why do I have to see all this? Why is this happening in broad daylight, in a sense?
Yeah, and he says, who long for death, but it comes not, and dig for it more than hidden treasures. He's like, the thing I want most is to just let my death come to me. He's like, that would be the best thing, is if I could just die.
Yeah.
And
well, I think the end of it is really good, because he says, the thing that I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. We've all had nightmares, and we usually wake up before the thing that we fear befalls us, right?
Oh, right. Yeah.
But you know how terrifying that is, that moment where you think it's going to happen, right? And as absurd as it is sometimes in a nightmare, but could you imagine having your eyes wide open and it's happening in broad daylight, and it's not a nightmare, and you don't wake up? That's how he feels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he's troubled in his spirit. So I have no rest, but trouble comes. He has the peace that he had before, the rest that he had before is also completely gone. It's not like
while he's so exhausted, while he's in this state of unrest, the trouble just keeps coming.
Yeah. Well, and we get something's haunting him about all this. And
yeah, of course,
he's still, why is the light given to him who's in misery? He's like, I'm still alive. What is going on?
Yeah.
And Now adding on to all the tragedy, now he's being tormented by something.
Well, the question is always why, right?
Right. And in this case, we get a peek at why, but he doesn't know.
No.
He just knows that something supernatural has happened. And this sort of, this outburst, this crying out that he's doing, he's not maintaining appearances in front of his friends, and we'll see by his friend's reaction. But he knows what he's saying right here is going to trouble them, but it's like he can't help it. He's like he
has nothing to lose.
He has nothing to lose, and he's like a prophet. He's just like, it's burning inside of me, and it just comes out.
Yeah.
A couple things about this. There's about this idea of that hedge of protection that God placed around him. So Satan criticizes God for protecting him with this hedge of protection. And the word there, I think, actually means like wall or a boundary made with bushes and whatever. So it's so there's this hedge of protection that God removes, and then all this is allowed to happen to him. And then I don't know, it's just interesting in verse 23, he's like, why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, whose God is hedged in? If I remember correctly, that's the same thing going on, where now Job feels like he's in a prison. He's been hedged. And
what does he mean by whose way is hidden? Does that mean like he doesn't know?
He doesn't know his purpose.
Okay.
I think. Whose way, a road, a course of life, a mode of action. So he doesn't know what to do.
Yeah, he doesn't know what's happening.
And like all he can kind of do is like cry out in the bitterness of his soul.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that hedge word is the same. No, it's not the same word, but similar concept. But then also there's like that hedge is kind of like a protected space. And so and it like a womb is a protected space.
Right.
And it's almost like, and all this happened in the springtime when new life is starting. And Job is crying. It's almost like Job has been born into, he's born out of that into a larger world. And what do babies do when they're born? They just cry. I feel like there's this sense that this is happening to Job. He's been born against his will. Like he didn't want to be born. And now he's just crying. And he doesn't know what to do.
He's been born into death. And so is a baby, for that matter. As soon as it's born, it needs to die. Right. And this is what I think is the overarching theme here. And why it's so interesting that he wishes that he was, that his only solution is not to be born, because we're born into death. We're born into pain and suffering. right? And the only way you get around that is not to be born ever, not to ever exist.
Yeah. And there's you said this before in previous conversations, but it's almost like the ethical ramifications of creation.
Yeah.
And so, and there's, just like Job is not guilty of anything, he's innocent. There's a way in which all of us are innocent. There's a way in which all of us are not guilty, and this is not to say that there's not sin or anything, but there's also this other way that God, when things like this happen, we cry out and want God to provide some answers. Like, what the hell is going on?
I was just looking up George MacDonald's Voice of Job sermon, and because I think the ethical ramifications of creation, I mean, that's a huge conversation, but but I think what's interesting about that is that it gives us a claim on our creator, right? Which is what George MacDonald talks about in that sermon. I'm just trying to find the thing here. The grandeur of the poem is that Job pleads his cause with God against all the remonstrance of religious authority, recognizing no one but God and justified therein. And the grandest of all is this, that he implies, if he does not actually say that God owes something to his creature. That's the grandest of all. Job says that. God owes, okay? This is the beginning of the greatest discovery of all, that God owes himself to the creature he has made in his image. For so he has made him incapable of living without him. This, his creature's highest claim upon him, is his divinest gift to them. For the fulfilling of this, their claim, he has sent his Son, that he may himself, the Father of him and of us, follow into our hearts. Perhaps the worst thing in a theology constructed out of man's dull possible, and not out of the being and deeds and words of Jesus Christ, is the impression it conveys throughout that God acknowledges no such obligation. Are not we the clay and he the potter? How can the clay claim from the potter? We are the clay, it is true, but his clay, and the spiritual clay, live clay with needs and desires and rights. We are clay, but clay worth the Son of God's dying for, that it might learn to consent to be shaped unto honor. We can have no merits. A merit is a thing impossible, but God has given us rights. Out of him we have nothing, but created by him, come forth from him, we have even rights towards him. Never, never against him. His whole desire and labor is to make us capable of claiming and induce us to claim of him the things whose rights he bestowed in creating us. No claim had we to be created. That involves an absurdity, but being made, we have claims on him who made us. Our needs are our claims. A man who will not provide for the hunger of his child is condemned by the whole world. And then he says further down here, he says, nay, we have claims innumerable, infinite, and his one great claim on us is that we should claim our claims of him.
Wow.
And I love that because there is no greater demonstration of faith than to claim something from God. Because if you don't think that he owes you anything, then he never made you. That's what I think.
Wow. That's powerful.
Yeah. And that's what Job is about. And that's, I think, why God calls him righteous, but we're getting ahead of ourselves.
I know. Shall we move on to chapter 4?
Sure.
So, well, let me see. So 4 and 5 is his friend Eliphaz. So Job cries out in his lament. And then Eliphaz, he is probably the oldest of the friends, maybe even older than Job. So he has seniority. And he starts out very, very patiently and very gently, but he's obviously disturbed by what Job just said. So that's kind of how this starts out. And I'll just read. Then Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, if one ventures a word with you, will you be impatient? Yet who can keep from speaking? Behold, you have instructed many. You have strengthened the weak hands. Your words have upheld him who was stumbling, and you have made firm the feeble knees. But now it has come to you, and you are impatient. It touches you, and you are dismayed. Is not your fear of God your confidence, and the integrity of your ways your hope? Remember, who that was innocent ever perished? Or where was the upright cut off? As I have seen, those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. By the breath of God they perish, and by the blast of his anger they are consumed. The roar of the lion, the voice of the fierce lion, the teeth of the young lions are broken. The strong lion perishes for lack of prey, and the cubs of the lioness are scattered. Now a word was brought to me stealthily. My ear received the whisper of it. So he's going into this vision that he has.
Right.
This like dream. Amid thoughts from visions of the night, when deep sleep falls on men, dread came upon me and trembling, which made all of my bones shake. A spirit glided past my face, and the hair of my flesh stood up. It stood still, but I could not discern its appearance. A form was before my eyes. There was silence, and I heard a voice. And this is what the voice says. It goes on for quite a few verses. So, quote, can mortal man be in the right before God? Can a man be pure before his maker? Even in his servants he puts no trust, and his angels he charges with error. How much more those who dwell in houses of clay, whose foundation is in the dust, who are crushed like moth. Between morning and evening they are beaten to pieces. They perish forever without anyone regarding it. Is not their tent cord plucked up within them? Do they not die? That without wisdom? End quote. I'll just continue into chapter 5 here. Mm-hmm. Call now. Is there anyone who will answer you? To which of the holy ones will you turn? Surely vexation kills the fool, and jealousy slays the simple. I have seen the fool taking root, but suddenly I cursed his dwelling. His children are far from safety. They are crushed in the gate, and there is no one to deliver them. The hungry eat his harvest, and he takes it even out of thorns, and the thirsty pant after his wealth. For affliction does not come from the dust, nor does trouble sprout from the ground, but man is born to trouble as the sparks fly upward. As for me, I would seek God, and to God I would commit my cause. Who does great things and unsearchable marvelous things without number. He gives rain on the earth and sends waters on the fields. He sets on high those who are lowly, and those who mourn are lifted to safety. He frustrates the devices of the crafty so that their hands achieve no success. He catches the wise in their own craftiness, and the schemes of the wily are brought to a quick end. They meet with the darkness in the daytime and grope at noonday as in the night. But he saves the needy from the sword of their mouth and from the hand of the mighty. So the poor have hope, and injustice shuts her mouth. Behold, blessed is the one whom God reproves. Therefore despise not the discipline of the Almighty, for he wounds, but he binds up. He shatters, but his hands heal. He will deliver you from 6 troubles, and in 7 no evil shall touch you. In famine he will redeem you from death, and in war from the power of the sword. You shall be hidden from the lash of the tongue, and shall not fear destruction when it comes. At destruction and famine you shall laugh, and you shall not fear the beasts of the earth. For you shall be in league with the stones of the field, and the beasts of the field shall be at peace with you. You shall know that your tent is at peace, and you shall inspect your fold and miss nothing. You shall know also that your offspring shall be many, and your descendants as the grass of the earth. You shall come to your grave in a ripe old age, like a sheaf gathered up in its season. Behold, this we have searched out. It is true. Hear and know it for your good. So that's Eliphaz, what Eliphaz says.
So he has this dream, and
The dream's intense.
the dream. So does the dream end at the end of 4, and then the chapter 5 is more of his own words? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the structure kind of seems like in the beginning, he's like, may I speak a word to you? Then he says, basically, I like this term. It's the doctrine of, what is it? The doctrine of,
oh yeah. Shoot. I know what you mean.
Retribution.
Retribution.
That the good get good and the evil get punished. The good get rewarded, the evil get punished. This is the doctrine of retribution. So when he says in verse 7, remember who was innocent ever perished, or where were the upright cut off? And Eliphaz starts out gently, but he's talking about where is it?
In 5 or 4?
In 4. Anyway, so he basically says this doctrine of retribution, and he uses the lion as this metaphor for the evil one, the evildoer. The lion is a predatory animal, and so he's like, the lion's going to be crushed. And then he says this dream, and let me just read the dream, what the spirit says in the dream one more time, just so you can have it all. Can a mortal, so he's like, when deep sleep falls on man, dread came upon me. So this is like, as he's falling asleep into deep sleep, he all of a sudden becomes terrified, and the spirit glides up over his face.
Right. And,
the hair of he's got goosebumps. There was something before his eyes. He couldn't discern it.
He saw a form, yeah.
And then this voice says, can mortal man be in the right before God? Can a man be pure before his maker? Even in his servants, he puts no trust. So that would be like his angels or the sons of God that we're used to talking. Even in his servants, he puts no trust. And in his angels, he charges with error. How much more those who dwell in houses of clay, whose foundation is in the dust? So that would be men, who are crushed like the moth. Between morning and evening, they are beaten to pieces. They perish forever without anyone regarding it. Is not their tent cord plucked up within them? Do they not die? And that without wisdom? So that's what the spirit said. And I'm like, it's like bone chilling because it's
That spirit has absolutely no respect for humanity at all. None. Right?
Yeah. And it's trying to place the holiness of God above everything. Like, there's nothing wrong with thinking that God is the most holy, but to the point where everything is basically dirt, and that even the sons of God and the angels are in error, much less people who are just crushed like a moth and are broken to pieces and,
Well, it reminds
and
me
die
of,
without wisdom.
we have anthills here in the forest. They're really big, and occasionally I'll run across one that a bear has gone through.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's just, the bear just sends it in all directions. It just looks like sand when the bear's done with it, and all of the larvae have been eaten. And, then whatever's left in that hill, either they rebuild it, which they generally don't, or they move to another location,
Mm-hmm.
a whole colony. And that's kind of the image I have here. This form that's speaking is like, between morning and evening, they're beaten to pieces. They perish forever without anyone regarding it. Like, how many anthills in the forest do I not see, right, that have been gone through and sifted through and
Mm-hmm.
destroyed by the bear, right?
Yep.
They're just, they're crushed like the moth. They're nothing. They're just insects, in other words. And it's interesting that he says, and how much more those who dwell in houses of clay, whose foundation is in the dust. Like this, the fact that they're made from the dust of the earth is really annoying to this creature. Like,
they're kind of disgusting.
They're disgusting, and they're so fragile and weak, right? And they're just like insects, and nobody even notices when they get crushed and stepped on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which is a really pessimistic view of, like, I don't know, maybe you can tell me, but it seems to feed into Eliphaz's life philosophy in a sense, doesn't it? Because God, in Job 5, the impression I had here when you were reading it was, we have a prime minister who's constantly saying that he has to keep Canadians safe.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm so like up to here with his being safe. Okay.
I'm safe enough.
But the problem with that is that he doesn't think that I can keep myself safe. Like, I have no value to him. Right. And so this is what his God, Eliphaz's God, seems to do. Like, he's handing them everything that they need, right? Their harvest, and, he sends water on the fields, and sets on high those who are lowly, and those who mourn are lifted to safety. Yeah. And then he catches the wise in their own craftiness, and the poor have hope. And, he's just running around, just putting out fires and keeping everybody safe. Right? But what does that leave humanity? It's the feeling I get from my prime minister when he says he has to keep me safe. It makes me feel like I don't have that ability. Like, I actually need someone greater than me to keep me safe, because otherwise I'm just not going to flourish. I'm just going to fall apart. Right. And so that makes me, it's a condescending statement for him to make, my prime minister, right? Mm-hmm. Because it makes me nothing. And so in a sense, if God has to run around lifting everyone out of, the low places, setting them on high, saving the needy from the sword, and the hand of the mighty, right? And all that stuff, then these things that he's protecting are just incapable of looking after themselves. Like they're totally incapable. They can't even handle it. Like they can't even handle a moment, right? And that seems to be what that form says to him when he says, between morning and evening, they are beaten to pieces. They perish forever, right? They're just things made out of clay.
Yep.
Like they're so fragile. They're so incapable.
Yeah.
They're weak, right? And if you don't hedge them in, then they're gonna just die like the moth. They're gonna get stepped on and crushed. And, it kind of makes sense that this form would say that to Eliphaz, actually.
Yeah. Well, and Eliphaz is kind of talking a little bit abstractly, but he's sort of insinuating things about Job. So like, when he says, I have seen those who plow iniquity and sow trouble. I've seen those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. So he's like,
he's heading in that direction.
He's heading in a direction where he's like, it's very simple, Job.
Yeah.
God rewards the righteous and he punishes the wicked.
Which is what he does in the following chapter, right? That's what God's doing in the following chapter in 5 when he
Yeah, these are all the examples. But it's so brutal that he's saying this to Job, like, I've seen the fool taking root. This is verse 3 and 5. But suddenly I cursed his dwelling. His children are far from safety. They're crushed in the gate, and there's no one to deliver them. He's saying the fool's children get killed. And Job just had all of his children die. Yeah. And so he's talking indirectly, and these may be even like things that you just say, you teach, you're like, don't be a fool. This will happen to a fool. But then this happens to Job. And so he immediately is just sort of like, Job, it's simple. This is what we've been taught. This is our wisdom. The things that he's saying are not outlandish. These things are kind of like,
standard.
And these are almost the basic things we learn when we're a kid, because we got to keep it simple for a kid. You go, if you do good, you'll have a better life. And if you do evil, and your life will kind of be ruined. Right. So don't do drugs, don't hate people, don't lie, don't fight. There's a siren outside.
Yeah.
We tell kids this, but this is like, it seems like it's very sort of, Eliphaz clearly is not taking Job's situation seriously. He's basically throwing his doctrine of retribution, his simple framework of good and evil over this, and just saying, because then he says, if it was me, I would seek God. I would commit my cause to God, because he does great things, unsearchable, marvelous things without number. Yeah. And then he goes through, he gives this beautiful speech. All of it maybe be appropriate in some situation, but it's entirely like not only missing the point, but doing harm in this situation. And then in verse 17 and 5, he says, blessed is the one God reproves. So he makes his point. He's like, God's punishing you, Job. And he's let you alive, because Job is asking in the last part of his speech, why is light given to a man who suffers? Mm-hmm. And Eliphaz is basically answering like, blessed is the one whose God's reproves, like punishes, but is allowed a second chance.
Yeah.
So don't despise the discipline of the Almighty. So Job's crying out is this sort of, he's like, Job, watch it, because you're despising the good work that God's doing in your life in response to your wickedness and lowliness. You being crushed like a moth.
Right.
And the thing that I get from this is how quickly religious and moral teaching gets reversed in this situation.
Yeah.
Most of what Eliphaz says, it is not wrong on its face, but in the situation, it's downright, it's demonic. It's like, it's evil what he's saying.
Well,
Because he doesn't.
He's telling Job that it's your fault that all this has happened to you, right? And we know because we've got the secret view into the divine council room that it isn't his fault, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, it's like this is the first place where you have to say, how is this wrong? What he's saying,
Mm-hmm.
because it isn't true. It isn't Job's fault, right? And God obviously, isn't just this God who runs around putting out fires and keeping you safe. In Job's case, God's like, have you seen my servant Job? Okay, go ahead, take all that, but
God's causing problems.
So who's right? Well, is Eliphaz right, or is God, or is what God? What's true here? And it's like, for me as a reader, I have to look at what Eliphaz just said, and like you said, it sounds good, right? But it's because we've heard this before. We hear it all the time.
This is standard moral teaching almost.
Standard moralizing is what it is, right? And we have to say, how is that wrong? Why is that wrong in this case? And the other thing to keep in mind is that Job is humanity, right? Like this happens to all of us. It might not happen all at once, but it might actually. Some people have had some terribly tragic lives. And I just know when I read through Job, the thing that stood out to me was I need to learn to do things differently. Right?
How so?
Well, I don't mean living my life, but when it comes to pain and suffering, how do I act and react in my pain and suffering? What kind of license do I have? And am I afraid of God? Like Eliphaz. He's afraid of God.
Yep.
Right? And do I have the right to claim from my creator? And those are all the things that came to my mind years ago when I read Job. And when I thought about it in those terms, I learned a lot more, right? I wasn't stuck with trying to make Eliphaz's speech legitimate. I didn't need to legitimize his speech, which I think a lot of people would do, right?
Yeah, and I think it's also important to put ourselves in Eliphaz's shoes. Can you hear the music that's playing? If you can't, it's good.
Not really.
There's literally a Dixieland band playing in the big room over there. It's so like they just started a second ago as we're like serious, and it's like doo 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 doo. Oh my gosh, this is funny. But I was gonna say that it's important to like put ourselves in Eliphaz's shoes, because he's an older man, he's well established, he's behaved, I'm assuming he's following these things. He's not preaching things that he hasn't done. but he's afraid of God. He's a little bit arrogant. He's
kind of slick.
He's a little slick. He's also wise, and he's going to say the correct things. And if you had a friend where their entire life fell apart, and then they said, I did nothing wrong. I wish I was never born. And then you you go to your tradition, your beliefs, and well, what does it say? How could I encourage this person? Well, it's more likely you did something wrong than you're totally innocent and that all this just happened to you. So give yourself to God, repent. God is gracious. And
where is that part where he says, okay, here, as for me, I would seek God. And to God,
it's 5:8.
Yeah, I got it here. And to God would I commit my cause. What does that mean? I've heard people say that. And when I read Job's lament, right? I see someone seeking God, truly seeking God in that lament, right? Because God is the foundation of his very being, right? Because he wishes he wasn't. In other words, to be or not to be, right? That is the question. And what, I hear this kind of language often. Well, I would just, seek God, seek the Lord, and give it all to God, to God would I commit my cause. What does that mean?
Yeah.
It does. I think that's what Job is doing. And yet he doesn't see it that way. So
right.
What does that mean to him? It's ambiguous. It means you have to look like this, because we have this thing all written out on how that looks like, right? And in order for me to know you're doing it, I need to see you do that in this order so that I can recognize that you're seeking God. But the way you're doing it right now, I don't know that. That thing's foreign to me, okay? I've never seen anyone get real with God before. And so I'm like, you're not doing it, because it's not all the stuff we laid out that I've been doing for years, right?
Yep.
That I need to see with my eyes, right? And that's the problem with moralizing, because moralizing can't be realized without morals, rules, ways to achieve this moral union with God, okay? And ultimately, it leads to a mechanical God, because you pull the levers, right, with your moral ways.
Yep.
And God acts and reacts accordingly.
Yep. Yep. That's the God of Eliphaz. And he's someone to be afraid of, because you don't want to do the wrong thing.
No, you don't want to push the wrong button.
Yep.
Right.
Because he even says at the very end of chapter 5, verse 27, he says, behold, this we have searched out. It is true. Hear and know it for your good. It's like, this is what we know.
Yeah, we've researched this, man. We looked it up. We Googled it.
Right.
We know that's true. It's the only way to go, right? So you got to do these things, which are what? Here, they are seeking God and committing your cause. Now, I don't know what that meant. I don't know what that means. I mean, obviously there's a way to do it, right?
Yeah. And he's even using, he says, for he wounds, but he binds up. He shatters, but his hands heal. He will deliver you from 6 troubles. He will, redeem you. So he's like, if you act in the right way, Job, God will respond in these ways. It's that mechanical thing. And he's like, things aren't getting better because you still need to do something. You need to repent. You need to.
And whatever Job does, Eliphaz needs to recognize it. It needs to be a familiar movement to him.
Yeah.
Right? Because, like I said before, in my opinion, Job is seeking God and committing his cause to him. Okay. He's got nothing. We just said he's got nothing to lose, right? He's down on the ground, face first, and it's all about him and God. If that's the only two things that exist in the world for Job anymore. There's nothing else, right? And then Eliphaz goes, well, yeah, but you got to seek God and commit your cause to him. Well, I am.
What do you think's going on, Eliphaz?
I am, but it's not recognizable to Eliphaz. Okay.
Right. It's outside. And in fact,
outside of the ritual, it's outside of the ceremony, it's outside of the norm, right? And this ritual and ceremony and norm has become automated in a sense, and then when that happens, God becomes mechanical.
Yep. Yeah. And, I think why is Eliphaz not seeing that something different is going on here? Like it may be actually very difficult for him to see this because he's lived his whole life and this is how things are. And now everything opposite is happening for Job. Everything, he loses everything. Then in chapter 3, he basically speaks in a very unpious, untraditional manner, even in not even that, but opposite to that,
right?
In his lament. And so Eliphaz is trying to get him back on track. And
what I'm thinking is that Eliphaz has never seen anyone get real with God. He's never seen that. They're playing it safe, okay? Eliphaz plays it safe.
Yep.
And Job has nothing to lose. I can hear a tuba.
And cue the Dixie music.
Can't hear all the high notes, but I can hear that boom, boom.
Yeah. There's aspects of Job that are so extreme. And again, like Eliphaz is he's understandable. Like you can understand this guy as a character and like who he is. Like this is not an unrealistic react. It gets to my friend's comment. This is a human story. This is how people react to tragedy when they're trying to make sense of it. Eliphaz has to make sense of it as much as Job does.
Yeah.
And he chooses to make it very simple, uphold the tradition, make sure, because what happened to Job, if Job's right, then this changes everything. And we're not prepared to just abandon all of our tradition and rethink everything. It's like, it's not tenable. He's like, it'd be better just to get Job back on track.
Just follow the procedures.
Yep.
Right. Do the things, admit your guilt, and move on. Right.
Right.
That's what it is.
It's better just repent to God and let's.
And then Job says the unthinkable. I never did anything wrong.
I know. We'll get into that in chapter 6. We'll do that in the next video.
Sure.
But Shari, thanks for talking again.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.